Now we want our students to have a very good understanding of airspace and all of the systems within them and the dimensions, the clearance, the requirements that are associated with each. So there's Class A, Class B, Class C, Class D, Class E, and Class G. We'll be talking about all of those in depth, talking first and foremost that there are two categories of airspace, being regulatory and non-regulatory. Within these two categories, there are four types. There's controlled, uncontrolled, special use, and military and other airspace. Categories and types of airspace are depicted by the following. So there's complexity and density of aircraft movements, the nature of the operations that are conducted within, the level of safety, and the national and public interest. So let's start with Class A. So in Class A, all altimeter settings are standard, so we set them to 299 or 2 so that everybody is on the same altitude setting, and that obviously varies with weather at what actual altitude you're at. The dimensions are 18,000 feet to 60,000 feet. The weather minimums are that all aircraft must be on IFR flight plans. The aircraft must be IFR equipped with Mode C altitude encoding transponders, and all pilots must have an instrument rating. Bravos look like upside-down wedding cakes, and they are tailored to the specific airport that it jurisdicts. The weather minimums are 3 statute miles visibility and clear of clouds. You must have 1,000-foot ceilings to take off VFR, and if you're flying within a Bravo, the speed limit is 250 knots. If you're flying below one of the shelves, the speed requirement is 200 knots or below. So the speed limit, rather, would be 200 knots. You need to have two-way radio communications, and you need to have an ATC clearance, so you would need to hear them say November 850 Papa Uniform or Purdue 50 or whatever they're using for your call sign. You are cleared into the Class Bravo airspace. You also need a Mode C transponder and ADS-B out. This ADS-B out is required within the 30 nautical mile veil surrounding a Class Bravo airport. You need to have a VOR and altitude reporting equipment if you're flying IFR, and you're required while flying under the shelf of the Bravo to have the VOR and altitude reporting equipment, but not within the class, but not within a Class Charlie. So you need to have a private pilot's license, or you can be a student pilot with an appropriate logbook endorsement. That is not true for all airports. Some bigger airports say that the PIC must have at least a private pilot's license. Moving on to Class Charlie. So the dimensions go in rings. There's an inner ring which extends from the center of the airport to 5 nautical miles, and then an outer ring which would be above the inner ring, which would extend out 10 nautical miles. The inner ring is from the surface to 4,000 feet, and then the outer ring, which is wider, is 4,000 feet, or from 12,000 feet up to 4,000 feet, or 1,200 feet up to 4,000 feet. The weather minimums are 3 statute miles of visibility, 1,000 feet above, 500 feet below, and 2,000 feet horizontally to clouds. The speed limit is less than 200 knots within the 4 nautical miles of the primary Class C airport, and if you're at or below 2,500 feet. Entry requirements are two-way radio communications, a Mode C transponder with altitude reporting, and ADS-B out, and that is within the Class Charlie airspace or above the Class Charlie airspace. You must have a pilot certificate or a student pilot's license. Class Delta, the dimensions are individually tailored but usually extend out 5 statute miles to encompass the TAF. It's from the surface to 2,500 feet AGL. The Class Delta becomes a Class Echo after the tower operations have closed at night, but it can also become a Class Golf, so check the chart supplement. The speed limit is 200 knots, indicated within 4 nautical miles of the primary Class Delta airport. The weather minimums are 3 statute miles of visibility, 1,000 feet above, 500 feet below, and 2,000 feet horizontally to all clouds. Entry requirements are two-way radio communications, and they must be established before entering and must address the tail number or call sign in which you are flying. You need a pilot certificate or a student pilot's license to enter. Now we have a Class Echo. The dimensions are not defined in the vertical limit, but rather extend upward from either the surface or designated altitude to the overlying or adjacent controlled airspace. So that would mean it would go up to Alpha if there's no airspace around above it, if you're just in the middle of nowhere and there's no major airports in the area. The transponder requirement, the transponder is required if you're above 10,000 feet or within 30 miles of a Bravo, and if you're within or above a Charlie. The speed limit is 250 knots up to 10,000, and above that is Mach 1. They exist from 14,500 feet AGL to 18,000 feet MSL, unless designated otherwise. But in the U.S., it's most common to start at 1,200 feet AGL. They usually exist, or they may also exist from 700 feet AGL and above, and it would be depicted as a magenta vignette line on a sectional, so you'd want to show your student what that would look like. It may exist from the surface and above, and that would be depicted by a dashed magenta line. And above Class A Alpha airspace is again Echo airspace, so above 60,000 feet it turns into Echo. Class Golf, if you are at 1,200 feet or below during the day, it would be the VFR weather requirements would be 1 statute mile of visibility and remain clear of clouds. If you're at 1,200 feet AGL or below during the night, it would be 3 statute miles of visibility, 1,000 feet above, 2,000 feet, 500 feet below, and 2,000 feet horizontally of clouds. More than 1,200 feet above the surface, but less than 10,000 feet MSL during the night. Weather requirements are 1 statute miles of visibility and 1,000 feet above, 500 feet below, 2,000 feet horizontal. More than 1,200 feet above the surface, but less than 10,000 feet MSL during the nighttime is 3,152, and more than 1,200 feet above the surface and at or above 10,000 feet MSL. The requirements are 5 statute miles of visibility, 1,000 feet above, 1,000 feet below, 1 statute miles horizontally to clouds. There are no specific entry requirements into a Golf, and there are no specific license requirements to enter as well. Now moving on to aircraft speed limitations per FAR Part 91-117. If you're flying below 10,000 feet MSL or within a Class Bravo airspace, the airspeed requirement is 250 knots. The maximum speed of 200 knots would be under a Class Bravo airspace, flying through VFR corridors, or flying below 250 feet AGL within 4 nautical miles of the primary airport or Class C or Class D airspace. Special VFR weather requirements per FAR Part 91-157. During the day, you need to have 1 statute mile of visibility and remain clear of the clouds with an ATC clearance. And if you are to receive a special VFR takeoff during the night, you need to be IFR rated and IFR equipped. Now, a fantastic way to test your student's ability is to give them a chart that would be like this, but without the numbers, and ask them to fill it out so that they can prove their knowledge of the different airspaces and VFR requirements. Now let's get into special use airspace. So MCRAP is the acronym in which we use to remember special use airspaces. There are a few more tacked onto the end of MCRAP that we should know, which are WNSALT-TM. But let's start with MCRAP. So MCRAP, starting with M, is a MOA, or a military operation area. MOAs are known to be used as air combat tactic areas where the military would practice air intercepts, acrobatics, anything from formation training to low altitude tactics. It consists of an airspace of undefined vertical and lateral limits, and they are established by separating military training activities from IFR traffic. So pilots operating under VFR should exercise extreme caution when entering into a MOA, and while flying IFR, you need to have clearance into one. Pilots can contact any flight service station within 100 miles of the area to obtain accurate real-time information pertaining to the MOA. Pilots are encouraged to contact the controlling agency for traffic advisories, and they're depicted on aeronautical charts as enclosed magenta hashed lines. So again, have ForeFlight pulled up. I'm using my iPad to record this, so I can't do that, but if you had a picture or your iPad with your student, obviously show them what a MOA looks like on ForeFlight or on a paper sectional. Controlled firing areas, also known as CFAs, are contain activities which are not conducted in a controlled environment, and they should be hazardous to non-practicing aircraft. Activities within this area are suspended immediately when a spotter notices an aircraft or ground or an aircraft flying into the area, and the spotter is either using another aircraft looking for people, radar, or just someone on the ground. And there is no way to know where these locations are, so you're not going to be cleared into it or anything. There's going to be a spotter who's going to spot you, and they're going to cease operation. A warning area is an area of airspace which is defined by 3 nautical miles outward from the coast of the United States, and it contains activity that may be hazardous to non-participating aircraft. Its purpose is to protect non-participating aircraft of danger, and it may be located over demonstrated or international waters, or both, to prevent people from coming into the United States without a flight plan and without identifying themselves. Restricted areas are airspaces in which not wholly prohibited but subject to restriction, and it's mainly because of their nature or limitations imposed upon aircraft operations. So it denotes the existence of unusual or often visible hazards to aircraft. Those things could be artillery firing, aerial gunnery, or guided missiles, and it's published in the Federal Registrar, and it's depicted on an aeronautical chart by blue hashed lines with an R in front of the identification number. Penetration of a restricted area without authorization may be extremely hazardous, and the pilot must contact the controlling agency prior to entry. Alert areas are depicted on charts to inform non-participating pilots of areas that may contain a high volume of pilot training or unusual type of activity. It's an enclosed magenta hash line with the letter A followed by the identification number, and pilots should be particularly alert when flying in these areas and be responsible for collision avoidance due to the high traffic. Prohibited areas are established for security or other airspace reasons such as national welfare. They're published in the Federal Register by a enclosed blue hash line, and a pilot may never enter into a prohibited area. So there's our MCRAP. Let's now get into the others, starting with a wildlife area, which are protected forests or national parks in the United States. Pilots are requested to maintain a 2,000-foot separation between themselves and a wildlife area, and it's depicted by a blue dotted line. National security areas, or NSAs, consist of airspace of undefined vertical and lateral dimensions and are established at locations that that require an increase in security and safety of whatever is happening on the ground there. And pilots are requested to voluntarily avoid flying through NSAs. And it could potentially be turned into a prohibited area depending on what is happening at that operation. SAFRAs, or Special Flight Rules areas, are regions in which the normal regulations of flight do not apply in whole or in part, especially regulations concerning airspace, classification, altitude, course, and speed restrictions. They're depicted by a blue boxed line, and they're in places like DC, the Grand Canyon, Ketchikan, Alaska, and Valparaiso, Florida. An Air Defense Identification Zone, or an ADIZ, requires you to be on an IFR or Defense VFR flight plan. It requires two-way radio communications, and you must make position reports before penetrating an ADIZ. Local airport advisories are only available in Alaska, and they're operated by FSSs, and they're located on an airport where there is no control tower. They provide advisory services to arriving and departing traffic. The temporary flight restrictions are known as TFRs. They are located in the FDC NOTAMs. The purpose of TFRs are to protect a person and property in the air or on the surface when the presence of a low-flying aircraft would magnify, alter, or compound hazard to the area. They provide a safe environment for operation of disaster relief aircraft, so your firefighting aircraft that are dumping retardant, or helicopters which are looking for people in after hurricanes and things of that nature. TFRs also prevent unsafe congestion of sightseeing aircraft from an incident or event which would generate a high degree of public interest, so things like the Kobe Bryant crash and things like that. They protect declared national disasters for humanitarian reasons in Hawaii. They protect the president, vice president, and other public figures. So if you have a presidential TFR in your area, you know that the president is going to be not too far. And the amount of airspace needed to protect person or property and provide a safe environment for rescue or relief is normally limited to within 2,000 feet above the surface and 3 statute miles in radius. But if you're unsure, you should ask the flight service station personnel during the weather briefing as to whether there's a TFR along the proposed route of flight or if there's any FDC NOTAMs. TERSAs, or Terminal Radar Service Areas, are like Class D airspaces where pilots can receive additional radar services. They're not required, but pilots are encouraged to participate in TERSA operations. MTRs, or military training routes, they are a route much like a Victor Airway, but for military personnel. They're mutually developed by the FAA and the DoD, or the Department of Defense, and they're for use by military for conducting low-altitude, high-speed operations, so that they can get from point A to point B in the least amount of time possible. The routes are usually 1,500 feet AGL and are generally developed to be flown under VFR. They're established below 10,000 feet MSL and speeds over 250 knots. If an MTR has 4 numbers, you know that it's below 1500 feet AGL. If it has 3 numbers, you know that it's above 1500 feet AGL. If you see the letters IR, you know that it's IFR, and if you see VR, you know that's VFR. And they're depicted on sectionals by gray lines. Now, published VFR routes are used for transitioning around, under, and through complex airspaces such as Class B. The VFR flyways are a general flight path not defined as a specific course, and they're for use of pilots in planning flights into, out of, or through complex terminal airspace areas such as Class Bravo airspace. VFR corridors are also published VFR routes, and they're used in airspace through Class Bravo with defined vertical and lateral boundaries in which aircraft may operate without an ATC clearance or communication with other air traffic control. Class Bravo VFR transition routes are a specific flight course depicted by transitioning a specific Class Bravo airspace. Pilots must fly the route depicted and adhere to ATC instructions. Pilots must also receive ATC clearance prior to entering a Class Bravo, and pilots must remain clear of the Bravo. On initial contacts, pilots should advise ATC their position, altitude, and route name desired, and their direction of flight. Other special use airspaces and airspaces to know are that there are parachute jump areas, and that would be depicted on a sectional by a little parachute. You should know the difference on a sectional of a towered and a non-towered airport, so whether it's the airport emblem is blue or magenta, blue being towered, magenta being untowered. The sectional charts do not depict SVFR, so you need to check the chart supplement and know how to use a chart supplement. Know how to convert time from Zulu to local time, and know the number to call for a weather brief. So in conclusion, the basic VFR weather minimums need to be known for all classes of airspace. The operating rules, pilot certification, and airplane requirements for A, B, C, D, E, and G must also be known, and also the special use airspace and other airspace areas. So this lesson can be kind of jam-packed, but understanding what weather requirements you need for VFR flight in every airspace is critical. Knowing what to expect and how to navigate and maneuver if you do plan a flight through one of the special use airspaces, and which ones you can go through, which ones you can't go through, which ones you need clearance and when, and how to check when they're active is also a big point of this lesson. Again, testing them, quizzing them, making sure that they can fill out a chart to show that they know each VFR weather requirement for each and the speed requirements. And yeah, just working through it. It's going to take a few lessons, but be consistent. Continue to ask them while you're flying, you know, what airspace are we flying into, which weather requirements do we need. I think being able to take ground lessons into the air is how we really build a strong foundation of knowledge and better pilots. So.